Hi, my name is Stuart Lynch, and in this video I want to show you how I'd go about updating my project that was originally developed with an iOS 15 target to iOS 17, and discover and update any deprecated APIs and take advantage of the other new frameworks available in iOS 17. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. As mentioned in the intro, I want to update a project that was originally developed for a deployment target of iOS 15, and I want to update it to iOS 17. And the reason I'm doing this is because I also want to use this project for a couple of subsequent videos that I'll be doing using other iOS 17 related APIs only, so stay tuned for that. I highly recommend that you download the starter project then and work along with me and save that completed updated code for the videos that will be coming out later this month. I will leave the dates in the description and replace those dates with links once the videos are released. So this is a slightly modified version of an app that I created for the Not Another To-Do app series that I released some time ago. This version is updated to iOS 15 with one slight difference. In this version, when you create a new to-do, you're presented with an alert that will ask you to enter the to-do item name, and then when completed, the to-do gets added to the list. If I exit and relaunch the app, you'll see that the data has persisted, and I've printed to the console the location where I stored that data. Well, it's in the Documents directory, so I can select this string, and then I can right-click, and then from the Services menu choose Open, and then run the service. From here, I can see that this file is a JSON file, so I can right-click on it and open it in my text editor of choice. So let me just use TextEdit. And I can see that save data as JSON. Well, back in the simulator, I have different edit options. If I click in the text field, I can make edits directly to update the to-do, and notice that the keyboard has a dismiss button. If I swipe to the left, I get the ability to mark the item as completed or reverse. If I swipe from the right, I can delete the item. In addition, there's a search field that will allow me, if there's multiple to-dos, to filter the list. That's it, a pretty generic to-do app. I'm running Xcode 15 Beta 6 at the time of this video. So I'm going to use the new APIs. But the first thing I'm going to have to do then is update the deployment target. So I'm going to select the project, and then in the project navigator, I'll make sure that I select the target itself, and then in the General tab, set the minimum deployment to iOS 17. Next, I'll select the project itself, and then on the Info tab, change that deployment target to iOS 17 as well. If I build the project, I can see that I still have a warning that says Update to Recommended Settings, even though it's built successfully. So let me click on that issue, and then I'll check the Asset Catalog and Enable Asset Symbols Extensions checkboxes and perform the changes. Well, now we're ready to take advantage of all the new features that have come to place since iOS 15. The first one I wanted to take a look at is the way that I print out the location of my stored file. For me, this has two issues. I currently have no idea where that print statement is, so this will be something that I'd like to investigate. And second, as you'll see, there is a better way to do this. Well, as it turns out, the print statement is in the initializer of our data store, and it uses a static FileManager function that I've created. Now, I don't want this print statement here anymore, so I'm just going to remove that call from the initializer, but I'll leave the rest, as that will handle the case where I have no values stored in our JSON file, and I want to have some sample data for our preview. So I'm going to go to the FileManager extension, and I see that static property for the .dir URL. In fact, we no longer need this, as in iOS 16 Xcode, we were introduced to a static function for URL struct itself, and that is the URL Documents directory. So I'm going to delete this .dir URL, and this is going to cause some errors in the subsequent save documents, read documents, and docExist static functions, as self.docDirURL no longer exists. So we can simply replace this though with that URL.documents directory. Well, I still want to print out this URL though, so now I find the best place to do that is when the app launches in the onAppear block there. Now, if I'm consistent with that, I'll always know where to look. And in order for this to be able to be selectable and opened using the Services menu, I've shown already you should append the path component like this. If I run the app now, you'll see that the location is printed to the console, and we can select it. Now, those of you who've watched the earlier video in this iOS 17 series, you'll be wondering why I'm using print when there's a better solution, and that is to use the OSLog. So let's do that. In the app start location where the app main is located, then let's import OSLog. In that My To-Dos app struct, then I'll add a new property called Logger that's an instance of Logger. And we'll leave out the initial optional subsystem and category arguments as they're not needed here. Then, in the onAppear block, instead of using a print statement, I'm going to use a logger.info method instead, using that same path. I do get an error here though because it states that the value has to be an OSLog message and not a string. Well, we can fix this by simply using string interpolation. And for me, I just select the text, and then I enter a single quote that surrounds the text. While it's still selected, then I'll use a left parentheses, and then tap the left arrow twice and then enter a backslash. When I run the app now, I see it still gets printed to the console, and I could select it and right-click and open with the Services menu as I did before. The bonus here, though, is that I get added features. If I was somewhere else in my project, like in my data store, I could click on this little quick look icon down here, and it'll display the metadata, and we get to see the call site. Better yet, I can enable the metadata and select the type option. And now when I hover over that log entry, I get the call site appearing at the bottom right, where I can tap on it and go directly there. Now that URL has opened our documents directory for our simulator, and I'm able to work in the console too though. If I return to the to-do list view, I can see that I already have some items in my to-do list. Now, I don't see the console appearing here by default, but I can show that debug area by either tapping on the button or using Command-Shift-Y. You'll see that the logger statement in the executable tab is still from the last run, but it's not showing here in the preview because our canvas view is not being initiated by the My To-Do Apps view. It's a standalone presentation. And another thing I found was that the logger doesn't work in the preview, so I am going to have to use a simple print statement here for this purpose. So I'm going to create an onAppear block here, and I'm going to print out the path to the URL documents directory. And as soon as I do that, you see that that path is appearing in the console. However, the path to where the Canvas Documents directory points to has some path components that are 2 words, and spaces are percent encoded with a %20, and my Open with these services won't work if that's the case. So we need to remove those percent encoding so that those spaces appear as real spaces. And we can simply do that by adding the percent encoded argument and set it to false. Now I'm able to right-click on it, and I can open it with the Services menu, and then again open it to see in my text editor that I have that same JSON. Now I can do whatever I like with that file. I can even copy and paste from a backup to restore items that I may have created earlier that I want to use again. So for example, with the sample resources, I provided a todos.json file with the correct JSON format. So let me just copy it over and replace the one that's there now. Let me bring back Xcode and refresh the preview. Now you see all of those to-dos that I had saved in that JSON file. And while we're at it, on this page, I see that the view is still using the old preview provider, and in iOS 17 we now have a new preview macro. So let me move all of the preview provider except for the preview content, and then I'm going to replace it with a preview macro. And it seems, at least in this beta, that the Canvas tab now displays the line number of the preview. Let me just change that whole name of the tab to use the view's name. Okay, on to more. Now this is not really necessary, but I thought I'd mention this. Prior to Xcode 14, creating an app icon was a real challenge. As you see here in the asset catalog, we had to provide icons for all different sizes in iOS. If we check the inspector, we see we have the option to switch to a single size if we wanted to. But in doing so, it doesn't remove the extra icons from the Mac OS that may have already been there. So what I'm going to do here in this project is I'm going to rename this existing app icon as something like AppIcon X. Next, I can click on this Add a Group or Image Set icon at the bottom of the Asset Catalog pane and choose iOS App Icon. Now this will create a new one with a single blank placeholder for the 1024 icon set. So let me right-click on the App Icon X and choose Show in Finder and locate the image that is the App Store 1024 icon.png. And that's the one I'm going to drop onto the placeholder. With that done then, I can delete that App Icon X folder from my project. Now, Apple will often deprecate APIs, but not necessarily remove them, and they still remain usable in your code. However, it's likely in your best interest to update your code whenever you can, because at some point they may remove them and your project will break. And it's far from clear as to when some APIs will be removed. When they are, you'll definitely know. But until then, though, they can be difficult to discover as Apple doesn't publish a list. So it's wise to read through the Apple release notes to find them. You can discover them, though, when you try to add new code to your project. So let me just comment out this foreground color and try it again. And here, when I start this, I see the code completion with a very clear foreground color will be deprecated in a future version of iOS. And they say to rename it to foreground style. And if I option click on it, we see that we're told that it is now deprecated and we should be using that foreground style instead. Well, this one slipped by me originally. If I search my project for foreground color, and in my case there is only one, this opens up a lot of new opportunities. But changing to foreground style will still work with our original colors too. I could go and change it one at a time, but if I had many of these, I could use Find and Replace. So instead of Find, I'll choose Replace. I'll enter foreground style in the With field, and then choose Replace All. If I do another Find, I see that they've all been replaced. Another thing that changed in Xcode 16 was the move from Navigation View to Navigation Stack, as we can see here when we option click on the struct. I can use that same Find and Replace method that I used in the foreground color to first see if I have any more and make that change as well. I see that I only have one. So let me make the change with a Find and Replace again. Now, related to Navigation View and Navigation Stack are methods that we apply to a navigation stack, and the first one I'm going to talk about here is the navigation bar title. Again, we see it's been deprecated. But also with navigation title, we could have added an additional argument for display mode and specify inline. Well, now we have to break this out into two lines. First, we need to display the title, so we'll just use navigation title. And then to set it as inline, we need to use the navigation bar title display mode and specify inline. But I'm not going to do that, so I'm just going to remove that second method. The next deprecated method I want to look at is the navigation bar items method. And as you see, it's been deprecated as well, so we should now be using the toolbar method to choose where we want to place all of our bar items, because there may be many of them. Now I see that there is one here for the keyboard dismiss function that uses a toolbar items group, and I did that because I want to place that button on the keyboard toolbar at the trailing edge, so I need to use a toolbar item group to do that with the space. For the new to-do button, I used a navigation bar item function with a trailing argument. Well, this is now deprecated too. Instead, we just add to our toolbar as a toolbar item instead. So I'm going to copy the button and remove this navigation bar items method entirely. Within the toolbar itself, I'm going to create a new toolbar item, and we can specify a placement and the content where the content will be what we had just copied. Well, for that placement, we see that we have a large number of options, and the one that we want is top bar trailing. Now sometimes our canvas refuses to behave and the help offers no clue. So what I often do is just go to another view and back again, and more often than not that fixes it for me. So I encourage you to drill down into the documentation and then find out what those other options are and how you can use them. But we can go right to our code right now and just test some out, like top bar leading, pushes it to the left, principal, puts it right in the center, and the primary action puts it at the top bar trailing. Let me just put it back to top bar trailing, and we'll see that there's no change. But what is interesting is that by default, top bar trailing is what Xcode would assume to be your default choice here, so we can leave it out entirely. Now one more thing to be aware of is that if we did not have this toolbar item group here and all we had was a top bar leading button like this on our toolbar, we wouldn't even need to include the toolbar item struct in our toolbar. We just need to use the OK button. But we want to have both, so I need to include the struct as well. Now another deprecated API that I almost missed was this overlay. If I option click on my implementation now, I get this message that I must use the overlay assignment content instead. So let me cut out this rectangle here, which is my content, and create a new method. I don't have to specify any argument here, so I can just use this overlay and paste back in my content. And now let me just refresh the canvas. Now sometimes Apple offers new APIs that are alternatives to others, but do not deprecate the older APIs. Structured concurrency was one example, and this year in iOS 17 we got macros in the new observation framework that can replace the combine-based observable object. I've already created a video on this topic and I encourage you to watch it. I'll leave a link in the description. I like to be as up-to-date as possible, so I'm going to replace the older combine method with this macro-based observation framework. Let me search for observable object. I see that I use this in my data store. If I option click, I see that there are no deprecation warnings, so I could continue to use this combine related property wrapper, but let's change it. So first, I'm going to import observation. Next, I'll decorate my class with the observable macro, and I'm going to remove the observable object protocol compliance. This creates all sorts of errors because the @publish property wrapper is no longer valid, so I can simply remove it in all 5 cases and that stops the errors. Well, the problem now though is that wherever we instantiate this, we can no longer use the observed object or state object property wrapper. And the error I get here is in my app starting point where I try to inject my data store object into the environment as an environment object, since environment object requires that the data store conform to the observable object protocol. So we need to change this from environment object simply to an environment of a data store. Now in this case, I'm actually killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Because data store is instantiated here, it is actually being instantiated as a state type object, not a state object, what we had formerly have called it. It's now designated simply as a state object. So what we could have done here was created a private data store state object at the top of our file, and then replaced it down here where we inject into the environment simply as a data store. That's the same thing. Now, since we're no longer using the environment object, we need to go to the to-do list view where we can access it from the environment and change this environment object here to simply be environment, and then specify the type that we want to access, which is datastore.self, and then assign it to the variable datastore. And since the environment knows that this is a datastore type, we don't need to add the annotation here for our variable. Now we get an error in our code that it cannot find the binding to datastore in scope. And this is a new limitation for the environment that I spoke about in that video I just referenced. We'll need to create a bindable object and assign our environment property to it. And we can do that right here where we create the body. And then in the preview, we'll need to change the environment object simply to just environment. And there you have it. I think I've successfully updated my app to the latest iOS 17 APIs. This video has been all about updating your code to be current. Well, that's true in life as well. You should always be updating your skills too, and there's no better way to do this than in a way that doesn't cost thousands of dollars or take years of schooling. And that's with Brilliant, the sponsor of this video. Brilliant's the best way to learn and update your skills in the areas of math, data science, and computer science. And you can do this in a fun, interactive way with thousands of lessons from basic to advanced topics. As more topics are added every month, Brilliant can customize content to fit your needs and lets you solve problems at your own pace. So take some time to explore what Brilliant has to offer and have fun doing so. Don't just stick with computer science. The more extensive the skills you learn with Brilliant, the more likely you are to get that job of your dreams. You can try everything Brilliant has to offer free for 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/StuartLynch. A link is in the description, so click now and the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. So I hope this video has given you some ideas on how you might go about updating your projects to the latest and greatest APIs that Xcode has to offer. Of course, you have to know that if your app is currently in the App Store, only those people running iOS 17 or later will be able to run your updated compiled app. But at some point, if you're maintaining your application, you'll have to update your code. So I hope that this tutorial has given you some ideas. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. And consider subscribing to my channel. This helps drive more people to the channel.